Welcome, everybody. It is a pleasure to be with you today. Good evening. It's early evening in Oslo, as well as in Stockholm, but morning in the US. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. This is Dispute Boards in the Nordics, and it's our first roundtable. In January, we had an introductory session which is taped. So in case you missed it, you can see it on DRBF's YouTube channel, which kind of laid the foundation for what is a dispute board and what is a dispute. Today, we're going to focus on Norway. And we are delighted to be joined by three outstanding practitioners in dispute prevention and resolution in Norway. And what we've decided to do is have the participants introduce themselves. So I will turn it over to Geir, and from there we'll meet each of the participants for this roundtable. Geir?
My name is Geir Froholm. I've been a practicing lawyer for almost 30 years, also working a lot internationally. I've been represented and participating in the RBA, where I met you, Asha, ICP. I just left a law firm to become a general counsel by one of the major contractors. Also been quite active with mediation, and I was the head of chair of the mediation committee in the Bar Association for 8 years. So this is a field, ADR, which really interests me. And also from the scope that we see that the costs are rising with arbitration and ordinary litigation. So I think this is a focus which I want to participate in order to contribute. Thank you.
Harald?
My name is Harald Kobbe. I was a practicing lawyer for about 4 years, mainly arguing cases in arbitration, regular courts, and so forth. The last 10, 15 years, I have been mainly engaged in alternative dispute resolution as an expert, as a mediator, as an arbitrator also, and to quite an extent the last 5, 6 years in what we call project integrated mediation, PRIMA, as we call it here in Norway. And I find that work, which is really focusing on avoiding conflicts rather than adjudicating conflicts, to be quite rewarding.
Thank you. Gunnar, I'm just going around as I see people on the screen, so no particular order.
Yes, okay, my name is Gunnar Garred. I work as a general counsel to the construction company Skanska in Norway. I have practiced law for about 25 years. I started off in an external law firm, but found my way to the construction company not too long after, and I've been here for about 15 years. Or Skanska, I would say, I'm a sort of a representative of a big contractor, and we know that big disputes are bad for business in a way. So we are very much interested in finding alternative ways of solving disagreements in our big projects and small. So this is an area that really interests me as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Amund?
Thank you so much, Aisha, also for inviting me to this panel. Last year I was appointed the field professor at law on the Scandinavian Institute for Maritime Law, University of Oslo, a role I combined with being an independent arbitrator and mediator. Before that, I was for more than a decade partner and head of the arbitration practice in the law firm Schjødt. And I guess what brings me to this table today is perhaps my experience with arbitration and the last years also with the expert system. The last 10 months I have rendered 4 expert decisions in quite significant infrastructure projects. So that's my input here, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you all. And I can see what the audience can experience from these introductions is we have collectively over 100 years of in-depth experience in all facets of dispute resolution and construction and beyond. And we are really eager to learn from all of this experience from the academic perspective, from the practicing perspective, outside counsel, in-house counsel, and a neutral's perspective as well. So, but I'd like to start by setting the stage. So to better understand, Harald had mentioned in his introduction that it's better to prevent disputes and then. So let's start by setting the stage and talk about the growth of dispute prevention in Norway and how you came to that, preventing disputes rather than resolving disputes. Harald, may I ask you, and maybe Geir can add from his experience as well?
Yes, Aisha. Actually, I think it's a rather general and international phenomena. Very shortly phrased as a frustration regarding the high level of costs and lengthy conflicts and litigations. And it's just like Gunnar just stated, him coming from a large construction company, this is something they really would like to avoid to the extent possible. I would say that alternative dispute resolution is preventing or avoidance to try to minimize such conflicts and litigation, and not the least to find solutions on what we may call a lower level and at much less costs. So, of course, you have to find the tool to use that is comparable or sustainable regarding the contract you're involved with. Some of these methods like PRIME may be quite costly, and then you would have to have contracts of some volume that would be able to carry the costs. But in any way, I think it's quite useful, and it's a definite trend in the Norwegian legal system.
May I add also that as a general counsel, and I suppose that Gunnar is agree with me, is the cost, the internal costs, the resources you're using in the construction companies in order to support when we litigation and arbitration. That's one driving factor. And secondly, we have a large number of international contractors in the Norwegian market, increasing the number in the infrastructure projects, which you know, Harald, you as a participant. And also that has introduced ADR or dispute board as an alternative.
There's a lot of tools, and you're talking about almost Harald, job site or lower level tools that you talked about. Amund, I can't help but ask from an academic perspective, can you give us a lay of the land of the available ADR tools, that spectrum that's available in Norway?
I'll try to do my best. Well, as the audience is perfectly well aware of, the spectrum of ADR is rather broad and constantly developing. And I will nevertheless try to outline certain key differences between essential current ADR methods. And in the present context, I have to limit myself to the Nordics and I would say the construction industry. And as indicated by Harald, there are basically two drivers for these innovations, namely to provide swifter and more cost-efficient alternatives to litigation and arbitration. And the trend seems to be to tailor-made ADR devices for different industries. For example, because disputes are a recurring issue in large construction projects, many of the innovations concern exactly construction contract. So what is the essence of these innovations? Well, many of the innovations are essentially hybrids. They mix elements from traditional dispute resolution methods like arbitration and mediation. A very good example, I dare to say, is the system for so-called expert decisions. In Norway, this system goes back to the Norwegian standard offshore construction contract of 1987, tailor-made for the really large topside project, basically constructing oil platforms. And it provides a mechanism where the contractor and or the company actually may request an independent expert to provisionally determine two issues. First, whether the disputed work in question is covered by the scope of work. And secondly, whether the contractor submitted the variation or the request within the applicable preclusive deadline. So it's a quite narrow scope, but still it could clear out many recurring issues. Further on, that kind of expert decisions are not binding, and hence they are at the outset comparable to the outcome of mediation, but where the mediator sometimes might actually express its more purely legal assessment of the case also. At the same time, there are obvious similarities between the expert procedure and so-called expedited arbitration. First, the parties exchange pleadings in writing. Secondly, and more importantly in this context, the expert decision will become binding unless the losing party initiates arbitration proceedings within a certain deadline after having rendered the expert decision, and then typically within 6 months. So what appears to be a non-binding decision could turn out to be binding. It should be noted that this quite, I would almost say, quick and dirty process, still, those expert decisions are to a remarkable amount, I would say, being accepted by the parties. And there are very few examples where they have been legally attacked. From the offshore sector, actually, I'm not aware of any such efforts. Quite surprising, maybe. The reason could simply be that most expert decisions are rendered by quite prominent experts sometimes. Well, that an expert decision as a clear starting point is not binding entails that it may be a very attractive alternative to expedited arbitration. Why? Well, a typical reason that the parties cannot, and in my opinion, should not agree on expedited arbitration is that they are not ready to accept a final and binding award merely based on a quick and dirty process. It's too risky, simply. And in this context, a non-binding expert decision might serve as an appropriate compromise. The parties are provided neutral guidance on the legal position, but without the risk of a binding and final award. And I think it's fair to say that those features, those benefits, explains why the Stockholm Chamber of Commerce last year launched the so-called SEC Express. And it is not limited to construction contracts, by contrast to the Norwegian expert system. Subject to consent between the disputing parties, it is available for any parties in any kind of dispute in principle. Aisha, before I finally answer your question, where Prime belongs in this spectrum, I would like to say a very few words about the vague term mediation in this context. And with regard to arbitration, we are very familiar with the distinction between ad hoc arbitration and institutional arbitration. Traditionally, mediation in the Nordics has been a typical ad hoc exercise, something that the parties and their counsel might consider after a dispute has arisen. And the content of the mediation process has, at least outside of the court system, typically been left to the discretion of the mediator. By contrast, Prime is a hybrid of mediation and expert decisions. First, like the expert procedure, it is not agreed ad hoc, it is an integrated part of the contract, and a Prime panel is hence appointed before any dispute has arisen. Secondly, the mandate of the panel is not limited to provide non-binding decisions. It may also actively mediate between the parties. So to summarize, Prime has I would say, three great features. First, the panel is appointed upfront, ad hoc, and hence the panel may assist on a very short notice. Secondly, because there is a permanent panel from the beginning of the project, the panel may gain substantial knowledge of the project. And needless to say, the panel's knowledge of the project may enhance its capacity to provide swift and correct opinions. Third and finally, due to the expertise and the parties' trust of the panel, the parties will in real life be very much inclined to accept the opinions of the panel. Well, that was my modest effort to locate Prime within the Nordic spectrum of ADR. Thank you so much.
This was a tour de force, and it certainly, what resonated with me as I listened to you is many features of those, either the expert in offshore contracts or Prime or Prima, have similarities and distinctions between the dispute board concept. And I note that we have a lot of international participants today. I noted Mexico and Jakarta, Indonesia, and we welcome you warmly to the frigid climate and envy you for your sun as we sit in the dark somehow, but it's getting brighter. So as we talked, Almond talked about ad hoc and mediation, and then talked about the expert giving a non-binding recommendation that could become binding under certain situations. And also talked about the Prime board becoming familiar, constituted at the inception of the project, and becoming familiar and integrated with the project team. From those, what resonates with me as a DRBF representative in Sweden is that a standing board in the dispute board concept is initiated at the beginning of the project, similar to Prime. A dispute review board in the dispute board concept is similar to the expert in that it gives a non-binding recommendation that the parties can choose to implement or reject, and it's non-binding when it's first issued. So they have to reject it unless it's rejected then under certain rules and conditions. So there's a lot of similarities, and I think a lot of cross-learning as we go along, and I look forward to exploring it more. Harold, one of the things that I think a lot of people or a lot of parties, particularly state-owned entities, want is some sort of binding option that can be enforced. Maybe not final and binding, maybe they're not willing to venture into fast track or expedited arbitration yet, but they want a result from the process that has some teeth. So can I ask you to comment about enforcement and the view, is it necessary in Norway, or is it Prime enforceable, the result of the Prime process? Sorry.
Well, Prime team does not render any decisions. The Prime team has, like Ahmed pointed to, a function where it follows a project from the start to the end. But a very important element of the work in Prima or Prime is that the team, the usually 3 persons appointed, they work by encouraging and facilitating a constructive dialogue between the parties at a very early stage. So we have our regular meetings. We have meetings even when the parties have said that there's no specific issues we need to discuss with it to have it determined or have a decision or have a view rendered. So You can say that the team discusses the issues with the parties, hear the views, ask questions, and it's quite usual that one issue can be repeated on the agenda for several meetings before it finds its solution. But the principle is that the solution is found by the parties by the help of the prime team. So the end is always an agreement, and an agreement is enforceable under Norwegian law. But it's not a decision by the prime team. It's not an arbitration award that could be enforceable, for example. I don't know if I answered your question.
You absolutely did. It's a bit you play a facilitative role, similar to mediation, and you assist the parties, nudge them maybe more softly or more forcefully in discussions.
Yes, and I have to say I think I'm now into my 7th or 8th Prime project, and I would say that at several occasions the team has kind of helped the parties through dialogue and discussions to focus on some issues that might become a difficulty in the project at an early stage. And we have also, not the least, our technical expert or member has given his or her views on how the parties may approach this problem to solve it the best way. And it's quite successful. All these previous has always ended with no conflicts between the parties when the project is ended.
Gunnar, I'm going to bring you into the conversation, and also Geir, because from Harald's perspective, as the neutral, as the Prima board, this is 7 times it's successful every time, and it's wonderful. Is that the same view from in-house counsel, or do you try and include it in your project, in your contracts, or do you try and exclude it from Skanska, which is a very large contractor in Scandinavia? You're on mute, Gunnar. Sorry about that.
No, I think definitely from Skanska's point of view, we would like to include it, and we've had several projects actually now back a few years where Prime was part of the projects from the start of the project, as Harald mentioned, and where they managed to both address issues very early in the projects before they became an issue, and they also managed to solve quite big disagreements, or at least potential quite big disagreements. That and I know Harald has been in a few of those. And forcing the parties to stay on and not allowed to go home, possibly over a full night, and coming out with both parties probably a little bit dissatisfied, but they can shake it off and go forward and look forward together. So for Skanska, it has been a great tool. And where we have ended up, I think, without any sort of legal issues at the end of the project. What is a bit sad from Skanska's point of view is that we now see, for instance, the Norwegian Road Administration don't use Prime anymore. They have, but they use the expert institution, which I think for it to be successful has similar traits, by the expert being introduced early in the project, where so that he or she knows the parties and can be introduced early, and maybe even serve as kind of a mediator in this. We have suggested to several other public clients regarding big projects to introduce Prime in the projects, but unfortunately, there is a reluctance. I know that the road company Nye Veier has introduced Prime, but apart from that, today I'm not aware that any big public clients are using Prime as a tool for dispute resolution.
May I have some
Fair.
comment, Aisha? Yeah.
Yes.
I want to add that it's very much up to the employer. As Gunnar also said, we need to be in agreement. And I find some reluctance so far from the employers, except Nye Veier, which are more liberal or more positive, as I've understood. But working in a company which is not that involved in the large infrastructure contracts, we should like to have a light version of Prima. It's too expensive, and that may create some hurdles in order to be in agreement with establishing a Prima. So I think that expert decisions are what we have been using and will use in the future for mid-sized and smaller contracts. But as to the infrastructure projects which we are entering into, I think that Prime is an ideal feature. But the employers is a little reluctant as far as I have experienced.
It's interesting to hear the Norwegian experience, because it is very, I see similarities and differences, of course, but if I look at Prime or Prima plus expert together, if you combine them together, it looks a lot like FIDIC dispute avoidance and adjudication board, where you have a facilitative dispute avoidance function and a decision-making function, but it's all in the same board, which, as we talked about these hybrid types of solutions, everybody can develop the contours to suit the needs of your particular project. And I'd like, at this juncture, I'd like to invite the international audience, as you're listening, if questions come to mind, and also the audience in Norway, because there's, as Geir had mentioned, there's international contractors now participating on projects in Norway. And it would be interesting to hear from the audience as well, if they've had experience in both Prime and using FIDIC maybe internationally, and how they might compare and contrast. And we also hear a comment from the audience that NEC also has the focus, the new engineering contract in the UK focuses on dispute prevention, which, as Harald said in the beginning, it's an international phenomenon because people don't want to waste money and resources. They want to focus on their core competence and address things early. But so, Harald, you have quite an in-depth experience with Prime. Can I ask you to comment maybe on the difference between what you see with Prime and what you might have seen with FIDIC?
Well, I haven't been directly involved in a FIDIC contract, so I have problems there. But what I can say with Prima, first of all, as a comment to what Geir and Gunnar said, is that yes, Nye Veier, which is one of the state-owned road authorities in Norway, is using Prima and has been a driving force behind that dispute resolution method. But also the railroad authority, Bane Nor, is using it, and the state buildings directorate, Statsbygg, has been using it for major projects in and around Oslo, and also some other major public interests are using it. I have been approached for Prima, for example, for new hospital projects and so forth. I think that one aspect with Primi is that, and that is what we have quite often felt, because we have Primi members who have been active in FIDIC-based dispute resolution boards, and they have a tendency to quite often want to, okay, let's tell them what we think is right. And when you are on the Primi team and you're following a project for 4 years, you don't want to do that early on, because if you tell someone what you think is right at an early stage, they might disagree, and they might say, okay, he is one side on this side or the other. So we have a principle that the projects are the parties' project, the disputes are the disputes of the parties, and we are just facilitators to help them reach agreements. And that is quite, I think that is quite different from the FIDIC system.
Yes, it is different, because in the FIDIC system, as many in our audience would probably know, is that you have the parties may jointly approach the dispute board, the Dispute Avoidance and Adjudication Board in the 2017 contracts for an informal opinion to facilitate their discussion. But the board, the Dispute Adjudication Board, with the agreement of both parties, may meet with the parties individually if both parties agree. But then under 21.4 subclause, if that dispute is not resolved amicably, the parties then have an opportunity to submit it formally for a formal decision, which is then binding. So it actually combines somehow, well, it goes beyond actually the standing expert. So FIDIC has replaced the decision-making function on disputes of the engineer with the dispute board. So they have a decision-making function, which that decision is temporarily binding once issued. So just thinking of the, I see consensus building. I see, the parties, the dispute belongs to the parties. So what, Amin, maybe I can ask you, what do you think from an academic perspective or from your legal practice, what has been the proportion of cases which are actually resolved by ADR to those that may have found their way going through these steps but not being resolved until the courts? You're muted, Amund.
It's indeed a very, very complex question, and there's no statistics here. But I think it's fair to say that with regard to large construction contracts with the government, there's still an issue that many of them ends up in the ordinary courts in quite massive cases, actually going for weeks and months, unfortunately. A recent trend, I dare to say, is that in some of the large Norwegian infrastructure projects, as already indicated, there is increasingly a willingness to not just agree on this expert system inspired by the offshore contracts, but it is even used. So whether that's a new and bigger trend or not, it's very hard to say. But right now, at least, there seems to be a willingness to rely on that mechanisms. But still, I think at least those onshore construction world is still haunted by massive disputes in Norway, increasingly so maybe. And my understanding also from Sweden is that the number of such big cases also for ordinary courts are increasing, and these endless topic disruption claims has now really started occupying also Swedish courts to a large extent. So I dare not to provide two general statements there, Aisha, but there is a very mixed picture, I would say.
Yeah, we're focusing on Norway, but it's hard not to draw a comparison with it because we're looking at the Nordics in general. And I see from this discussion, Norway has been quite proactive. Maybe there is a reluctance in the onshore construction industry, but you've been quite proactive in the use of ADR. And being in Sweden, I don't see that same proactive willingness. Harald, can I ask you to comment on your view? Not to compare and contrast the Nordic countries, but just to gently ask why Norway is so far ahead.
Well, I think one part is of the background is that we used to have an extremely high level of legal conflicts. 3-4 years ago, I took part in a seminar in Oslo, and we had panelists from all over Scandinavian countries, and you know, we have Nordic companies, so we have people working both in Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, and they compared Norway to some very non-Scandinavian countries when it came to the high level of conflict. So it has been a kind of legal tradition in Norway to have a lot of conflicts in the construction industry, unfortunately. And I think that, and we don't, like in Denmark, don't have an arbitration institute, which is well funded in the construction industry. So it became an absolute necessity to try to find a way out of this. I noticed that Amin said massive litigation. They are also often messy litigation, massive and messy. So we had to find a way, and I think that was the start of it. Around 2005, the Norwegian road authorities were having a huge construction project in the middle of Oslo, and the people behind that said, we cannot go through this project with all the typical traditional Norwegian litigation. And that was actually when they established the first PRI in Norway. So it was not the wheel, but it was invented in Norway with a little international inspiration at that time. And the funny thing is that when we now go back and compare it with what is internationally known through the FIDIC system, through the World Bank system and others, we see that the wheels look pretty much alike. They turn around the same axle and they have the same movement, but they have some different aspects of it, but they are all there to achieve the same goal, less conflicts and solutions on a lower, less costly level.
Yeah, they always, I guess, necessity is the mother of invention. And I think a very similar story is what led to the growth of the use of dispute boards in the US and building the Eisenhower Tunnel, and you can't afford the disputes.
Can I
Gunnar, yeah, I was gonna, yes.
You know, Skanska is
Just about to ask.
a company owned from Sweden, and you know, I was asked by both the general counsel of Skanska AB and others, you know, what is going on in Norway, all these disputes, and because then, you know, they didn't experience the same thing in Sweden or Finland or some of the other home markets. But I think that all the parties, really, both the clients and the contractors, they have realized now that this is not viable, and so I think all parties are trying now to find ways of avoiding the big disputes that has sort of been a trait in the Norwegian construction market the last maybe 10 years. So it's looking much better, I would say.
You know, I think one takeaway oftentimes is that a pre-arbitral or a pre-litigation or a dispute avoidance step, even if it doesn't resolve the dispute, it might work to narrow it and make that litigation less messy and massive. Is that also the experience, Harald, in Norway with Prima?
Not so much with Prima, but with mediation, which I'm also involved with. It's clearly the experience, and also actually with experts, because experts render their views, the statements, and the parties look at them, and they don't always agree, but they don't go further. They say, okay, this is a view from a person we respect, and let's use that as a foundation for our further work together without conflict.
If I could add some context here. You asked, Aisha, about why has those devices innovated in Norway, for example, this expert system. And with regard to the offshore projects, some of them being some of the largest construction projects in the world, actually, they had a massive impact on the liquidity of certain contractors. The project could go for 3 to 4 years, even 5 or 6 years. And you can say a key aim of the expert system was to enable the contractor to balance out the variation of the system. So being imposed to carry out disputed work, maybe having a liquidity impact of 500 million NOK just in the next 6 months, was then a necessary tool to enable the contractor actually to finish the project properly. So in some of the more spectacular cases, without the expert system and without the so-called provisional payment after having succeeded with the expertization from the contractor's point of view, it will go into bankruptcy. And it's fair to say that those EPC contracts were very large and very complex in the manner that they were starting the construction phase a long time before maturing the design properly, simply because the drive for first oil. So there were some very particular aspects of those oil and gas projects necessitating a vehicle like this. Not so much any longer, I would say, with regard to liquidity maybe, but still, I think expert decisions work very well to narrow down the number of items left to the final settlement.
Yeah, and I think this dovetails very well to a question that we have in the Q&A, this positive experience. And I'll read the question. It says, could you please share an example in a comparative best practice experienced with in dealing with dispute avoidance, focusing on Norway? And the comparison is on a project that had a contractor and a government as the two parties, and compare that with a project that might have had a contractor and a private party as the employer. Can I just throw that out to Harald? I'll start with you because of these 7 Prima projects that you've worked on. Any of those have a private owner?
No, unfortunately not. They all have public owners, but some of them are some publicly owned entities, like for example hospital entities, are almost in many ways behaving like a private institution. They are publicly funded, but they are run like a private institution. So it's not that much difference. Actually, I don't think it would be much of a difference whether you have a public builder or you have a private builder on the one side of the contract. But that is in Norway, where we have, like I've said in many other relations, we have a very high level of trust in the authorities, and I trust that there is a very low level of corruption. And of course, in Prima, the parties always agree on the members of the Prima team, both the numbers, whether have 1, 2, or 3, and who to specifically appoint. So at the bottom is that you have appointed someone that you have trust in, that you believe can do the right things for you. And I think that is more important, and that would level out whether it's a private or a public builder involved in the contract.
That's another similarity between Prima and the FIDIC dispute board, or dispute avoidance and adjudication board, that both parties have to agree on all members. If it's 1 or 3, we don't, because of the decision-making function, there are no even numbers in dispute boards. But the parties have to jointly, they may each nominate one for the approval of the other, but they both have to agree. And in fact, the agreement with the board member is entered into between the employer contractor and the board member. So it's a 3-party agreement.
Same in Norway.
And yeah, and that the foundation of trust and respect is critical to this working. And the only comment that I have for our question is, it's often very difficult to have private entities. We heard from the panelists that the hesitation because of the cost of entering into Prima, or the Roads Authority hesitating with putting a prime board. This is similar to the international experience, where you see dispute boards maybe stood up where the funding agency requires a dispute board, where there is a policy requiring a dispute board. I see in the private space, companies having maybe a mediation, an umbrella clause to say mediate first, or something of that nature. But I also with FIDIC, I don't see the private entities having dispute boards as much as the employers. Amund.
Yeah, just one comment comparing the company being the government or a private company. And I think my experience as a counsel, at least, is that in some large contracts with the government, the project leader on the governmental side could be very willing to arrive on an amicable settlement, but due to quite firm budgets and procedures, it's very difficult for them to arrive on a horse deal, to use that term. But an expert decision, for example, or a legal opinion from a neutral third party could, in practice, facilitate a settlement also on those kind of questions, simply because it is then provided some neutrality. It's an external third party ensuring that there is something here. It's a compliant procedure, so it could simply enable the government to be more flexible and swifter in paying what should be paid.
That's a very excellent point, and it is true that sometimes governments need a decision or an outside third party, to whether it's budgets or whether it's to take action, and that's a consideration. And I think that the key aspect is the necessity in the construction industry that drove the development, because you can't find your way to court if you're going to have successful projects on every issue. You've got to solve things along the way. And we talked a lot about construction, and Amund focused his comments early on the spectrum on construction. But now I'd like to expand the conversation. Do we see any other industries that, you know, we learned from the offshore industry, but that's somehow construction offshore? Is there maybe is there a possibility, do you have any recommendations for increasing the uptake, whether with different parties in construction or different industries, like the maritime industry or the like? So I'll start with you, Gunnar. I know you're very focused in construction, but
yeah, I think I will pass this question on to someone else.
okay, Ahmed.
Yeah, I have a couple of examples where they are systematically pursuing those alternative routes. And for example, minor shipping disputes, which I work some with, they are very often actually addressed by expedited arbitration, simply because the disputed amount is too limited to have a full-scale arbitration. That's a recurring example. So in London, they have up to 1,000 cases every year, quite minor cases, referring to that and commodities, basically. Another trend, at least in the Nordics, is that you have a lot of M&A projects going on. And very frequently you have an earn-out clause where the seller will be able to additional payment subject to some success of the top management remaining in their positions. And it's fair to say that earn-out clauses are subject to many disputes. And hence it's becoming more frequently to have a kind of system where you can ensure a swift decision on that earn-out dispute. It could be an auditor, it could be a board, something that is not dependent on a full-scale arbitration case going on for years. So many industries are realizing the need of certain swifter and more cost-efficient dispute resolution tools, indeed.
Harald, what's your view?
I agree with what Amund is saying. Actually, my next job now after Swift vacation will be mediation in regarding an earn-out clause.
Yeah.
so
Directly to the point.
Yeah. In my view, I would say that these methods that we are now discussing are worthwhile trying in any contract that is of some complexity, which means that there is a possibility of conflicts, that is of some long-term aspects of it, so it lasts for some time. Then it might be very useful to have one or several persons following the project through and giving advice and facilitating dialogue. And of course, the volume, the economic volume of the contract must be so high that it can afford having such a setup helping them on. But for example, I've never seen it used, but I have observed from not so long distance complex contracts regarding, for example, telecoms, computerized businesses and so forth, with a lot of arbitration and complex litigation going on. And I would assume that from my perspective that they might have been very well helped by having a PIMA team or a dispute resolution board helping them along the way, with of course then the technical expertise and the legal expertise that is relevant for that kind of contract.
Geir, do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, in the PPP contract, the road contracts, we have operation and maintenance agreements running for many, many years. That could be a scope for some kind of ADR or dispute resolution maybe, or expert decision, what I don't know. A maintenance agreement and real estate, I think it would be very much the same. These are huge contracts running for a number of years with great values involved.
So we really have to look at the characteristics of the transaction, and if there is this massive complexity within the transaction and known unknowns that may eventuate, certain risks may eventuate, that's not unique to construction. So, but if a project or a transaction has those characteristics like real estate, like management, like maintenance, like M&A, it may be worth having a further conversation around that. And I think that's definitely worth the investment in exploring. We have 5 minutes left. Surprisingly, this 60 minutes has gone by very fast. So before we close, and I realize we just have these 5 minutes, but I'd like to ask each of you to kind of give us your thoughts in terms of a recommendation that for improving efficiency in ADR or expert proceedings that follow. I mean, your takeaways, your thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience today. Harald, I'll start with you.
Well, I think the most important thing is to analyze the complexity of the contract and the possibility of conflicts at an early stage. And the parties should discuss this issue between them and take that as a stepping stone, a starting point for discussing, okay, how do we proceed to reduce the level of conflict between us carrying out this contract? I think if you do that, then you have a good basis for discussion whether you want an expert, a mediator, or a prima team, or any other method. And it is like Armin said in the very beginning, these are all hybrid solutions of various, you put things together as they fit the contract, and I think that's the way to approach it.
Gunnar, you declined the last question, so I'm going to insist on this one.
Yeah, this is more, I mean, I'm very into the construction business, so I apologize for that. But I definitely think that, well, we would like to see alternative dispute resolution in some way, much more in our projects. And one thing that also Geir mentioned at the start is the cost, and it's maybe because there's a perception that if you want to introduce Prime or some similar tool, then it costs a lot, and it has to, of course, follow the project from the start to really be successful. So to promote a similar tool that are less costly, or it can be more efficient for smaller projects, I think that would be great, and we could even agree on a single sort of prime panel with one person to help the parties as long as the both parties have trust in this. So I guess that's my recommendation, and I also see that we have our subcontractors, and we have a way to introduce these things in our subcontracts as well.
Armin, may I ask you if you have some thoughts?
Yeah, I could make a final remark on the expert experience. And I think it's fair to say that both the parties and council should be more conscious about the following, that if the dispute raise quite complex factual technical questions, the expert procedure and a very tight schedule is not adapted to manage that kind of cases where you should hear witnesses. And I can sometimes experience too much optimism that the parties promise me to be able to agree on the factual matrix. But when I receive the first and even the second submission, I'm sometimes getting very frustrated because I'm almost asked to guess about certain facts. So this is more a final conclusion, that there are certain limitations with regard to the use of such a swift expert procedure. It cannot be used for everything. Thank you.
Geir, to you.
Okay, I'll be very short. I will follow up on Gunnar. I think it's very important to create a prime light solution. And that's caused by we need to solve problems before they develop. You have to solve them there and then. Otherwise, it develops and escapes. It creates a lot of issues, both factually and legally. And further, I think some need of standardizations. We need some manuals. We need some standard agreements, which we don't have, as you have in FIDIC, because you have to develop this agreement in principle from time to time. And the project Harald is involved. I've been involved when I was a practicing lawyer, and we had some obstacles to explain what is PRIMA and how do we make the agreement. So standardization is a keyword. Thank you.
Well, I thank you all, and I have just some to just draw on a few threads and also come up with or share with you what I've heard or what I've come to know is the hobby horse of Niall Bunny, who has worked a lot in FIDIC and has on dispute boards. It's to invite parties to view the cost or the as an investment in prime or in the dispute board, because it's an insurance, exactly as Geir was saying. It's an insurance against the escalation of a dispute and the cost of arbitration. So it's an investment rather than a cost. And so if you look at, there are some statistics in the DRBF that we can talk about later, but it is, think of it as an insurance, as an investment towards ensuring project success and prevention of escalation. And the other aspect that I think that we can all agree with is that, and I've heard you all say, is that we need to be able to understand the available tools and create hybrids that really address the issues and that are cost effective for the parties. So there is we can have standardization, but within that, we need to have collaboration and education about the tools such that the parties can customize and tailor their tools to their needs and to what is appropriate to them. And I think we're just on the first step of a long journey with DRBF, and in introducing the dispute board concept. It's similar to PRIMA, it's similar to the expert, and it could just add some extra things to add some tailoring to PRIMA or add the cross-learning. So I just want to thank you very much for your generous contributions today and your willingness to participate. And I hope this is just the first of many conversations that we can have. And I invite the audience to join me in thanking the panelists today.
Thank you, Asha.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very interesting.
That's true.
Good evening,
Good evening.
everybody. Thank you again. And thank you for the audience.